there and welcome. My name is Gretchen Van Usselston, and I am the Director of Education and Program Development here at the Specialty Food Association. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this webinar in our In the Know series. A recording of this presentation will be available in the Manage Purchases section of your SFA Learning Center later today. If you have any questions for our presenter during the webinar, please use that Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to those questions toward the end. So now I'm so pleased to introduce you to our speaker. Alli Ball is the founder and CEO of Food Biz Wiz and the creator of Retail Ready, an online program providing strategic support, curated curriculum, and values-aligned community for producers of packaged products in the food industry. As a former grocery buyer turned wholesale consultant, Alli has helped thousands of emerging brands understand what it takes to get on the shelf and have high sales once you're there. Find her at foodbizwiz.com or on Food Biz Wiz, her award-winning podcast about wholesale strategy. Please join me now in welcoming our speaker. Take it away, Alli.
Thank you, Gretchen. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Let's just jump right in. Today, I'm going to tell you my 4-step process for perfecting your pitch, for connecting with those wholesale buyers, and being fully prepared for those crucial introductory meetings. So whether that's over the phone, whether it's in person at a potential new wholesale account, maybe it's across the trade show booth, like at next month's fancy food show. So this is a great time of year for landing new wholesale accounts. Wholesale buyers are still considering new items for their shelves before we get too close to that dreaded fourth quarter when they turn their focus into holiday sales. So this is the perfect time to get these steps sorted out before your next sales pitch or your next trade show. So let's get into it. I've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to expand on that intro a little bit, tell you who I am, how and when you should ask questions, how we can use the chat, the Q&A, all of that. But let's get to some content first. As we do, I want to ask your permission for me to give you some tough love today, straight from my time as a grocery buyer. I love giving you the truth of what I wish I could have said to brands who pitch their products to me. And some of that, I'll be frank, it can come across as tough love. So I want to know if you are up for that. So just give me a yes in the chat or a thumbs up or something to let me know that you are down for that tough love today. Yes. Okay, Laura. At least one person here is saying yes. And Laura says yes. Great. So let me kick off with some right now. Don't wing it. My number one rule for having a successful first meeting and that opportunity to pitch to wholesale buyers is just this: do not wing it. So even if you feel like you can do sales in your sleep, that you know your product and how to talk about it through and through, that you can speak to anyone, right? That wholesale buyer, that consumer, that grumpy shopper who walks up to your demo table, or that buyer who's trying to avoid eye contact with you on the trade show floor, right? I'm telling you this: pitching your product to new wholesale accounts or to new brokers or to new distributors or to any other potential partner in your business is not the place to wing it and to go in underprepared. Wholesale buyers are busy, right? We know this. They don't have time for you to ramble during your sales pitch or time to wait while you get back to them with answers on things like if you can do what you can do for introductory pricing, or wait for you to calculate if you're up for doing guaranteed sales and for how long, right? All of these things need to be sorted out before you pitch. So while you might feel like you're a natural and there's no need to practice these steps, I guarantee you that the most seasoned founders and sales reps all have room for improvement. I'm a former grocery buyer who has seen, I don't know, tens of thousands of pitches. And in all my time, there's been only a few, fewer than I can count on a single hand, that were 100% dialed in. So like I said, I'm here today to tell you my 4-step process for connecting with those buyers, for having that successful wholesale pitch, for landing on those retail shelves and in new wholesale accounts, and for getting reorders once you're there. But it always begins with this golden rule: don't wing it. All right. Okay. So As Gretchen said, I'm Alli. I'm a former grocery buyer, former head of grocery at Buy Right Market in San Francisco, turned wholesale consultant. I'm the creator of Retail Ready, an online program with curriculum, strategic support, and an engaged community, which I have run for the past 8 years. Retail Ready has helped over 3,000 brands with their wholesale strategy. So it's a topic that I talk about all day, every day with food, beverage, and taxable grocery brands. Like Gretchen said, I'm the host of the Food Biz Wiz podcast, which is about to hit episode 250. So at the end of today, I'll tell you more about how you can stay in touch, where you can find the podcast, how you can join our free online wholesale week training happening next week. But let's get into learning first. So I left Buy Right about 10 years ago and started my consulting business, coaching brands on wholesale strategy. And at Buy Right, I saw time and time again that really good product, really great product, really delicious product failed on our retail shelves or never made it to the retail shelf in the first place because brands weren't ready for wholesale. I was determined to peel back that curtain and share those wholesale secrets, that insider knowledge with emerging brands, which is why I launched Retail Ready and which is why we are here today. So while I'm presenting today, you might have questions, and that's great, right? I always like knowing that you're engaged, knowing that you've got questions, knowing that this is stimulating, questions in your brain. So as we go through this, please feel free to put your questions in that Q&A box. This is casual. I really want to make sure that you get the most out of today. So of course, ask away with your questions. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to drop questions as we go. Of course, if I know I'm going to answer your question later in the training, I'll just kindly pause on it too, and we'll get to it at the end if I don't cover it. I'm also going to ask you to use this chat box, right? You guys have already done this, but I love keeping you guys engaged and listening and driving discussion in the chat box. So let me kick off with a question here. Let me ask a prompt for you, and I want you to put a number in the chat box on a scale of 1 to 4. So here's the question. On a scale of 1 to 4, how confident are you that you can land any account that you pitch to? Right? 1 is, help me, I'm lost, that's why I'm here, I'm sweating just thinking about it. And 4 is, move over, Alli, hand me the mic, I close 100% of the accounts that I pitch to. Give me a number. I'm seeing lots of 2s, 2.5. And I want to be clear here that there's no judgment, right? Like everybody starts at 1, or everybody starts at 0, right? And if you were a 4, you likely wouldn't be here today. Right. Okay. So 3s, 2s, 1s. All right. All over the place, which is wonderful. Great. You are in the right place. Right. And no one's saying, I'm a 5, Alli, move over. All right. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to share a high level overview, and then we'll go into detail on each one. First, we're going to talk step 1, prepare. Most people skip this step, but you are here, which means you're taking action already. Step number 2 is prepping your peas. Step number 3 is the pitch. Most people jump straight to the pitch. And number 4 is persistence. So let's get into details on each. And hear me when I say this. We want to keep it so simple and so straightforward that you can get to a place where you can replicate these 4 steps in your sleep. We want you to get to this place where you are feeling great when you go into your next sales meeting or your next trade show or your next category review meeting, right? We want to get you to the place where when I ask that question on a scale of 1 to 4, you're like, oh yeah, I am a freaking 4. Like I am ready. Okay, so step number 1, prepare. I also call this craft your why. Before you reach out to a buyer, before you display at your next trade show, before you blindly ship or swing by with samples, before you start stalking those wholesale buyers on LinkedIn or DMing them on Instagram, I want you to craft your why. So you've probably heard this before in terms of branding and marketing, but this is not what we're talking about here today. I mean, sure, yes, you need the why that addresses the reason why consumers flock to your brand, but for today, we're putting that aside. So what do I mean by this? Craft your why in regards to wholesale buyer pitching. It means that there has to be a clear, succinct answer as to why that wholesale buyer would bring in your product line, right? Why would they spend time, energy, labor, especially in this market, to bring in your product? There has to be a compelling reason. And here's where I like to pause, because I'm guessing that many of you here today are thinking, well, Alli, it's because my skincare line is so gentle, or because my snacks are really delicious, or because my alcohol-free cocktails are perfect for cutting back on booze, because my sauce line makes people inspired to cook. Let me know in the chat. How many of you think that your product is delicious, or inspires joy, or is helpful to the consumer, or is the better choice because you are more sustainable than the other brand? Or maybe you're great because you're local, or women owned, or BIPOC founded. Let me know in the chat if you have any of these fantastic attributes and you think it's a selling point for your brand. Right. And usually this is where people are like, I don't want to admit that that's me, because Alli's about to tell us that this is wrong. Yeah, Lisa says, I've got some of them. Yeah. And here's the thing, that all of those things are great attributes to your brand, right? If you are a food producer here on this webinar and you don't think you're delicious, we've got a problem, right? At this point, you likely think you're delicious. You inspire joy. You are sustainable. You are the better choice. You know, you are better, right? All of these are great attributes to your brand, but they're not what sells a wholesale buyer on your product line. So I want you to put aside this belief that the buyer is going to bring in your product because it's delicious, because it's sustainable, because it's women owned, right? When you are stuck on this belief, you don't craft a pitch that's of much interest to a buyer. So I'm going to tell you this. When I was a buyer and I would hear a food business owner start a sales pitch by saying, hi, my name's Lauren, and I make the most delicious granola ever, I'd be there on the other end of the phone, like rolling my eyes and thinking, yeah, Lauren, you and everybody else who's pitched to me this month. I told you I was going to give you some tough love. So let's talk about the real reason why buyers bring in new products. Buyers bring in new products. They purchase products to enhance sales or margin in a particular category in their store. So their decisions, 99% of their time, their decisions are based on whether or not adding in the new product line, your product line, will increase overall sales or margin, or some other financial goal of that category. So remember this, a wholesale buyer's performance is measured on the financial health of their categories. So if your product doesn't increase total sales in your category, it's not worth it for the buyer to spend all that time bringing in your product line. And it can't just be a one-for-one swap here. So for example, if your cold brew coffee just takes away from chameleon cold brew sales, but shoppers aren't buying more iced coffee in that store, it is officially not worth it for the buyer to add in your product line. So in short, if your product doesn't help the buyer meet their goals, it is not worth it for them to take the time to bring in your product. And so some people get upset here, right? Some people get upset here and they ask me, okay, Alli, well, where is there room for my story in the sales pitch, right? Where can I tell that buyer about my sustainability efforts? The fact that I am a BIPOC food founder, the fact that I'm women owned, that I'm really, truly more delicious than others in my category, right? Sure, yes, you can share those things with a wholesale buyer in short, bulleted points in your follow-up emails, on your sell sheet, on your website, on your packaging, but we hook them with the picture of sales success first. So I want to be clear here. Those are all wonderful things to talk about when you are speaking directly to the consumer. right? Directly to that end consumer. Shout the fact that you are donating 1% of profits towards regenerative soil projects, right? Tell everyone that you are a Black-owned brand. Share the fact that you taste so good that your sauce is just eaten directly from the jar, right? Go for it. Those are all wonderful things to talk about with the people who are purchasing your product, right? Over the demo table, on social media, in your newsletters, on your shelf talker, but that's not what you want to lead with when speaking to a wholesale buyer. So that's step number one, articulating why a buyer would bring in your product in the first place and how your brand can help them achieve their goals. We literally have our retail ready students bullet point this out, right? What does your brand bring to the table that helps the buyer gain higher sales or higher margin? And how can you convey that to them during your sales pitch? So once you have this dialed in, you are on your way to being able to communicate with the buyer. Again, until you're super clear on this, you're wasting both your own time and that buyer's time. So now you're ready for step number two. But before we move on, let me know in the comments how this lands. Give me a yes if you need to work on crafting your why, on going back and revisiting, crafting your why through the lens of what will my product do to help that buyer reach their goals, right? Here's a question. What if you have a unique product that expands the category? Yes, so expanding the category increases sales, right? If your product truly is unique and brings new sales, yes, absolutely. That's a great talking point in a sales pitch. We expand the category with our blah, 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 blah. Here's how we bring new sales to the category. You're right on track there, Lisa. Okay, so that's step number one, that craft your why. Ready for step number two? Prep your peas. All right, let me get back to my slides here. Prep your peas. Again, I cannot say this enough. You've got one chance to make a positive impression on a buyer. So whether that's on the phone for a sales pitch, in person at a sales meeting, across your booth at Fancy Food, over Zoom, right? You have one chance here. So from that very first interaction with a buyer, you need the buyer to trust you, to trust that you will not only help them achieve their buyer goals, but that you're going to be an easygoing, low maintenance vendor who delivers upon their promises, who's a breeze to work with, and who is a surefire win for your category. So how do you get that buyer to trust you? It's straightforward. You come to that sales meeting having prepped your peas. So you need to be 100% prepared to answer all of the questions the buyer is going to ask you about ordering, delivery, pricing, and logistics of getting your product to their shelves. So if you don't have it worked out yet, and again, here's the tough love, you've got to put in the time to figure this out before you pitch to new accounts, right? Remember that tough love at the beginning. Don't wing it here. If you are looking to land on new shelves this season, this is where you need to focus your energy. So remember I said at the beginning that the buyer doesn't have time for you to get back to them, right? Once you figure out how much it'll cost to ship your product to their store, or to think about what promo allowance you can offer, or to confirm the lead time to such and such region, or if you'll do guaranteed sales, right? So this is why. By the time you're in that sales conversation, you need to have this dialed in. If you don't, that busy buyer is going to move along to the next brand. And when you don't have answers to the buyer's questions, that buyer hesitates and the foundation of your relationship starts to erode. So make sure that you're ready for that sales meeting or that first interaction at the trade show, right? You've got a chance. One chance. So I'm going to rattle off my 5 Ps, and this might feel like a lot of information here. So the good news is that you can come back to this recording as you take notes and figure out what things you need to sort out before your next sales pitch or trade show. And the other news too, right? The news I'll offer here is this is exactly the type of work that we do with food, beverage, and taxable grocery brands inside of Retail Ready, and what we're doing with folks next week in Wholesale Week. which starts on Monday. So my team and I love helping producers prep these 5 Ps so that you go into every single buyer meeting feeling 100% confident. So let's talk about these Ps, okay? Number 1, product. What are you selling? What's the case count? What's the shelf life? What's the minimum order, right? Literally, what the heck are you selling? I can't tell you how many times I would get on a sales call and hear things like, "Hi, this is Pam, and I make Pam's Perfect Puffs, and I would like to sell them in your store." I'm like, "Pam, I don't know what the heck your perfect puffs are," right? Are they puffs for adults, right? Like Barbara's? Are they puffs for kids? Are they dog treats? Are they a new type of dish sponge? Like, what the heck is a perfect puff? I don't know, right? So we want to be crystal clear here. What are you selling? And then all those details, case count, shelf life, minimum order, all of that. What the heck is going on with your product? The second one, placement. Second P, placement. So what channels work best for your brand? What type of stores or wholesale accounts are the right fit for your product line? Where are you best merchandised in the store? Where are there cross-merchandising opportunities? What type of channel or store isn't the right fit for your brand? This is particularly important at shows like Fancy Food, where you've got all different buyers from all different channels coming at you. You got to know how to filter them. Who isn't the right fit? So placement, we think about channel placement and then the physical placement in those accounts, right? If you're thinking about food service or something like where you're put on a menu, literally where on the menu is it going? Let's say you make a non-alcoholic beer. Do you want to be listed in the beer category? Do you want to be listed on the non-alcoholic section of the menu? Ideally both, right? So we're talking about how do we communicate the placement to that buyer? The third P that we get into is pricing. And most people skip this step. You've got to understand, thoroughly understand your COGS and your retail margins, taking into account future margin for brokers or distributors. And with your pitch, that buyer needs to understand how much it's going to cost to purchase your product, how much it's going to cost when it lands at their account, and what margin they make when they sell your product, right? Give me all the details about the financials of selling your product. P number 4 is promotion. How will you market your product so it sells off the shelf? How are you conveying that to the buyer so that you are going to support your product through promotion, education, quarterly marketing, whatever your product needs, so that the buyer, isn't expected to do all the legwork here. So maybe you have shelf talkers. Maybe you have recipe cards. Maybe you have digital assets that they can use. Maybe you do demos. Maybe you provide product for quarterly team meetings or parties, right? How can you convey this to them over your trade show table, during that sales pitch, in your follow-up sales emails? How are you going to take responsibility for getting your product to sell? We got to talk about promotion in the sales pitch. And then finally, purchasing. So how does the buyer actually order your product? Is it direct? Is it through a broker? Is it through a distributor? So one isn't necessarily better than the other, right? And brokers and distributors are not always required, but you have to be able to clearly convey how the buyer orders and receives your product. So you need to have concrete answers to all of the logistics that go into the store's ordering, receiving, and selling of your product. So being flexible on the above doesn't make you seem accommodating here, right? It makes you seem unprofessional. And there's certainly room to negotiate with a buyer on all of these Ps, but you have to come prepared with answers first, right? I think one of the challenges that I see, especially with smaller brands, is, oh, Alli, well, I'll just get into a conversation with the buyer and I'll see what they need, and then I can accommodate them. And again, when you wait for that buyer to tell you what they need, again, it's not being accommodating. It's coming across as underprepared and unprofessional. We don't want that. Nobody wants that, right? Okay. So you've prepared your 5 Ps. And honestly, I'll tell you, when we go through this in Retail Ready, this is where people are like, oh my God, like, Alli, you're really telling me I gotta like slow my roll and answer all of this before my next sales meeting? Like, I've got a sales meeting tomorrow, Alli. Like, what the heck do I do? And so if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed with these 5 Ps, that's completely normal. So let me know in the chat, which of these 5 Ps do you need to put the most energy into? Product, placement, pricing, promotion, or purchasing? If you look at these, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one do you need to revisit before you feel confident in that next buyer pitch? There's a question on the chat. Okay, let's see. 4, 4, 4, promotion. Okay, lots of things on promotion. Great. Kelly says, this is great, Alli. Can you elaborate on the promotion part? So what should be included there? Okay, great. So usually with promotion, this is where folks say, okay, Alli, well, just tell me, just tell me what I should offer for a promotion. Just tell me, you know, like, Alli, should I be offering a 20% off, 20% off my product 4 times a year? Like, is that enough? Is that good enough? Or like, Alli, can I do 15% off twice a year, right? And this, you're going to hate this answer, Kelly, and anybody else who said that they were needed to focus on number 4 here, is that the promotion piece is so specific to your brand. And it has to be a promotional strategy that works in line with your business's goals. And so, yeah, sure, I can tell you as a buyer, I loved a 20% off promotion 4 times a year, right? In times that like matched a seasonality with your product, right? Like, let's say you make barbecue sauce. I would have loved a 20% off promo around 4th of July weekend. Let's say you make kids snacks. I want to see that 20% off promo right as we're hitting back to school displays, right? And so, yeah, I might be like, okay, anybody on this webinar, Kelly and anybody else, I want to see 20% off 4 times a year. But here's the deal, Kelly. If that doesn't work for your brand, don't do that, right? If your brand, if you're looking at your cash projections and you're like, we can't afford any 20% off promo any time of year. We can do I'm just making this up, but we can do a buy one, get one once a year. We can offer that. Or we can offer free fills on any like new placements that do an opening order of $1,000, right? So I hate that I say this, but it so depends on your own business cash flow, your goals, the accounts that you're in, the retail relationships that you have, right? So you've got to think about, with this promotion piece, what can I offer? What can my business offer that's in line with my skill set and my financial situation that helps the product sell off the shelf? Okay, I'm going to look at the chat here. So let me know if that lands, Kelly. Okay, great. So people need 3 for pricing. Yep, pricing's a big one. Great. Placement and pricing. Great. We do private label offering. So pricing and promotion is flexible for discussion. Awesome. Yeah. And again, like, these things are flexible, right? But you've got to come into the conversation saying, we offer, our wholesale price is $6 a unit, and we want you to sell it for $9.99. You make 40% margin on it, right? And that buyer's like, nowadays we really need a 44% margin. Like, can you drop to $5.80 a unit, right? And that's when the negotiation starts. But again, you've come to the table saying, here's what we need, here's the starting point, and then you have the negotiations. Yeah, okay, great. Could promotion be how you as the brand may promote your brand being in the market? Yes, absolutely. So an influencer strategy. Yes, absolutely. Influencer strategy is a great type of promotion. And again, you would need to think about, okay, how is the influencer strategy, if we're speaking to that retail buyer, how can I convince the retailer that our digital influencer strategy has an impact on in-store sales, right? You've got to paint that picture for the buyer. Like we've got, this sort of online traction, we've got this influencer strategy, and here's how it drives trial on the shelf. So paint that picture. But yeah, that's exactly it with promotion. Great. Okay, great. Perfect. Discuss obstacles when discussing private label with the buyer. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure, Michael, if you're asking me to discuss the obstacles or if you might talk about obstacles in that buyer conversation, right? Like, what are the challenges in this private label relationship? What do I need as the brand? What does the retailer need, right? Coming to the table again. Okay, awesome. So lots of work that needs to be done around these 5 Ps. And I was really happy that a lot of you said P number 4, promotion was something to focus on. Because in my experience, what I see is founders, sales managers spend so much of your resources, time, energy, money, creativity, like mental bandwidth to get your product on the shelf, right? All of that takes time and resources and effort and commitment and all of those things. And then you have very little left, resource-wise, money, time, energy to actually sell off the shelf once you're there. And so if I had to look at any of these P's and say, like, which one do I think most people have to work on? Pricing, yeah, but once we get pricing dialed in, we're good there. But promotion, how the heck are you going to take full responsibility for your sales success, right? It goes back to promotion. Okay, so that's step number 2, right? The 5 Ps. Let's move on to step number 3, the pitch. The one chance pitch. So how do you get a hold of that buyer for the pitch? It is straightforward, and it kind of depends on the sales channel that you're going for. But in the most straightforward way, you pick up the phone and you call them. You call that store. You call that headquarters. You ask to speak to the buyer in your category. It can be that simple, right? Or again, if you're at Fancy Food next month, you're even closer, right? You've got that conversation across the trade show table. So when you've got their attention, either on the phone or in person, what do you do? So in a succinct, clear way, you introduce yourself, your brand, and why your product is going to bring high sales to your category in their store. You then ask if you can get them samples and more information. And that's it. It could literally be 4 sentences. So I'm going to give you an example of a phone pitch here. I'm gonna pretend I'm pitching a product. And I want you to think about, as I go through this, just take some notes here, even in the chat, about what worked well in this sample pitch. I want you to listen carefully here. All right, so again, I'm making this up. So if I were to call a store and it's like, ring, ring, okay. Hi, my name is Alli, and I'm the founder of Up the Ante. We make the first ever farm direct protein bar made with ants. As I'm sure you've seen, alternative proteins and insect-based snacks are a trending category. They're actually up 23% from last year in specialty grocery. I'd love to swing by next week with a sample. How does Wednesday at 1 p.m. work for you? That's it. Right? So what worked well there? When I just said that pitch, what worked well? I can say it again if we want. So listen through on the second time. Hi, my name's Alli, and I'm the founder of Up the Ante. And I might say, do you have 30 seconds to talk? They're like, yes, I do. Okay, we make the first ever farm direct protein bar made with ants. As I'm sure you've seen, alternative proteins and insect-based snacks are a trending category. They're actually up 23% from last year in specialty grocery, just like yours. I'd love to swing by next week with samples. How does Wednesday at 1 p.m. work for you? And then that's it, right? Yes, and Farm Direct, says Gretchen. Yeah, I was really clear. We make the first ever Farm Direct protein bar made from ants, right? You know, in sentence number 2, exactly what I'm selling. Kelly says, nailed it. Love the trending category piece and the sell through. Yep, up 23% from last year in specialty grocer. I'll tell you this, buyers are numbers people, right? When I was in my buyer role, I was heads down, in my P&L week in and week out. I was looking at sales reports every single day and seeing how items were moving. So if you give that buyer a hard stat, give them a number, and it is music to their ears, right? Kartik says category growth, clear product, call to action on next steps. Exactly. I'm really glad you noticed that call to action here, right? I want to get samples in your hands. Right? Here's what I want to happen next. One of the mistakes that I often see founders make is they've got a okay sales pitch. I'm going to tell you all about my brand. So we'd love to be in stores like yours. Hope you have a great day. It was really nice talking to you. Bye bye. And there's no clear call to action. As a sales manager, as a founder, as someone who is responsible for sales, it is on you to move that relationship forward with every single interaction. Otherwise, what's the point of it, right? Again, we don't have time to waste. You don't have time to waste. That buyer doesn't have time to waste. Every single interaction needs to move the relationship forward. Okay, let's see. Do the work for them, make it easy to say yes, or at least get them intrigued. Great. Yeah, agreed. A couple other things. I really want to point out that it was really short, right? That was like 4 sentences. It was a really short pitch. I didn't ramble on about, oh, I started this company because my son was protein deficient and allergic to chicken, right? Like, I'm making this up. I don't have a son. But I didn't share like the heart wrenching story of why I started this company. I didn't talk about sourcing the proteins from Mexico, right? Like nothing. I guess I said Farm Direct protein bar made from ants, right? But I kept it really, really, really short. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that on that second go around, I made it really clear that I said, do you have 30 seconds to talk, right? And I treated that buyer like a real human being. So often I see sales managers just launch into the pitch. And frankly, I kind of did that on the first one. But if you're talking to someone on the phone, if you're talking with someone over the trade show table, recognizing they're human, right? So, hey, do you have a second? I'd love to tell you about my brand. That feels so much better than just, hi, this is Bob, the buyer. And you're like, hey, Bob, my name's Alli. Let me tell you all about my brand, blah, 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 right? Consensual selling there. Okay. So what would I have done differently if I were at a trade show and Bob, the buyer, walks up to the booth? Again, I would say, do you have a second? I'd love to tell you about my product. I would have done pretty much the same exact thing. Instead of saying, I want to come by next Wednesday and give you samples, I might, from underneath my booth, here's a sell sheet. Can I have your business card? Can I scan your badge? Whatever it is. And so it's slightly tweaked for the trade show, but very, very similar. Okay. I want to say just a side note here, Up the Ante is a fake company. This 23% is a fake stat. So if you're working with insect-based proteins, please don't use this stat because I made it up. It's fake. Okay. So to recap, the first part of step number 3 is to get that buyer to say yes to accepting your samples and yes to more information about your brand. Every conversation or interaction needs to move that relationship forward. That's your first milestone here. So finally, then you've made contact. You've arranged a time that you can either drop off samples or you can ship samples, right? If you're at a trade show, you've gotten that follow-up information, you've handed over samples, right? Or you've arranged to ship them after the show. So then what happens? You recap. everything by email, right? You want to make sure, again, that you remembered to get that buyer's email address when you were talking to them, right? So you recap your selling points, literally bullet pointed out. We don't want to see paragraphs here in this email. We bullet point out our selling points. You attach your price list and your sell sheet. And then again, you hand over or you're shipping the samples. And again, let's say you're not at a trade show and you're doing this all over the phone. If you have confirmed a follow-up appointment, you show up professionally and on time. You hand off your samples, your sell sheet, your separated price list. You tell them one sentence on why you're a good fit for their store. You're not expecting to like taste through your product line together. Like that would be a bonus. And then you go home and you recap it all by email. And again, that's it. Okay, same thing. If you're at the trade show, you do all the handoff and then you go home and you recap by email. So from here, your sell sheet does the talking for you. If you don't have a professional looking sell sheet, that's one of the first things that you need to change. Your sell sheet is the face of your brand, right? It needs to be as thoughtful as your packaging is. So that sell sheet is simply that double-sided, full color PDF that includes all the information the buyer needs to know about ordering your product, right? All 5 of those P's. And then we'll move on to step number 4, the persistence, as you start to implement your sales follow-up strategy here. So with that, again, with that interaction, you've got to be fully prepared to answer all those questions in the pitch. There's a reason why we've already worked through all the P's at this point. Because in that interaction, whether it's over the phone or in person, that buyer's going to say, okay, cool. Well, I'm interested in your product line, but can you offer free fill on first order? Right? And so you got to know, can I offer free fill on my first order? What the heck is a free fill and how much is it going to cost me? If I work with a distributor, even more complicated. How does that impact my pricing and my cash flow if I'm using a distributor and offering those free fills, right? So working all that out ahead of time. Okay, so once you do pitch succinctly, professionally, thoughtfully, you are ready for step number 4. What happens after the pitch? Persistence. The follow-up happens after the pitch. I like to call this the squeaky wheel. So you've likely heard that phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And that is really true in our industry. So let's talk about how you follow up with those buyers after you make that initial contact, you have the conversation, you drop off or you ship samples, or after this trade show, right? And I'll say this, the same technique also works if you are just getting silence, radio silence, when you're trying to get a yes to get them to receive your samples in the first place. Persistence is key here. Just keep reaching out. And you have to be so persistent to the point where you likely feel uncomfortable. I recently read a stat in HubSpot, my favorite CRM, that said that 44% of salespeople give up after the first time they reach out, but 80% of yeses happen on the 5th try. Isn't that wild? I'll say that again. 44% of salespeople give up after the first time they reach out, right? So they send a sales email or they try on the phone and they don't get through. 44% of you give up after that first try, but 80% of yeses happen on the 5th try. Isn't that wild? I just think that stat is crazy here. So I'll tell you this, the most common complaint that I get is that buyers don't respond to your emails and they don't call you back, even after expressing interest or promising to bring in your product line. So even after you meet at Fancy Food and they're all fired up and they're like, yes, we're going to make this happen. And then they ghost you. Tell me if this has happened to you guys. Give me a yes if you've ever had this experience happen. They're all excited and then they just disappear. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it sucks, right? Let's just admit it. It sucks to be in that position. You're like, I thought they liked me. I thought they liked me. Yeah, Kelly, you've got that stat correct there in the chat. So I need you to hear me when I say that this is normal. It's not you. It's the buyer. So I am perhaps one of the most organized people you will ever meet. And it would still take me months to bring in product, even product that I really, truly wanted to bring in. So there are so many steps to bringing in a new product that often you guys, the vendors, don't even take into consideration. So let me tell you just briefly what it takes to put a new product on a retail shelf. First, there's back and forth about your product, which is what we're really, really trying to minimize here, right? Again, every time you got to like have a follow-up with a buyer, it just extends this timeline. Okay, so we minimize the back and forth, but there's some back and forth. Once the buyer decides it's a yes, they have to do behind the scenes prep to bring in your product. So in many instances, the buyer has to discontinue product to make physical room on the shelf for your brand. So if they're discontinuing something, they naturally pick the slowest moving item in the category to get rid of and replace it with yours. Again, remember, it's this betting game here of higher sales. And so you know what that means here. It's going to take a really long time to sell through the product that is taking the space that you are going to get. Remember, because it's the slowest moving item in the category. So from there, the buyer has to enter all of your information into their point of sale. They need to get you set up with their accounting department. They need to get approved, sometimes approved for purchase. They need to notify their team of any merchandising changes, right? Maybe they're rewriting a planogram to fit you in. They need to update operational procedures, right? Like maybe the team needs to now know we take 6 packs of your tortillas out of the freezer at a time. We date them with our date gun 14 days out, and we rotate them, slacking them in the fridge, right? Maybe, so from there, they're printing price tags. Maybe they're printing shelf talkers. They do any sort of staff education that's required in the store. So at Buy-Right, we had a weekly internal newsletter that was sent out to all employees, telling everyone the story behind each new product. And each week I was allowed to bring in 2 new products. That's it, right? And so if you think about that, I'm like, what's 52 times 2? 104 new products a year. That was my cap, right? So you gotta, it's a lot, and you gotta get in line. So long story short, it's a lot of work to bring in new products, and it can take months and months and months. So while that buyer works all of this stuff out behind the scenes, right, you want to make sure that you are emailing consistently to stay top of mind with that buyer. I'm talking about emailing every 2 weeks to say hello, to let them know of any recent press that you've gotten, to talk about any promotional materials to share. Maybe Specialty Food Association has put out their trend report, right? Their state of the industry, and your category is highlighted, right? Forward that to the buyer, right? Basically any reason to email, to pop into their inbox, to remind them that you exist. So again, this advice applies regardless of whether you met them at a show, you're cold pitching for the first time, you are pitching and you're getting no response, right? Keep going. And again, you might think you're annoying at this point. Jay, I see your question. I'll answer that in just a second about category reviews. So you might think that you're annoying at this point. And so remember here, that squeaky wheel gets the oil. If you are the first brand that the buyer thinks about when they're doing your category reset, you are going to be closer to the top of the list. So follow up and follow up and follow up, right? My goal inside of Retail Ready is to get this down to 2 touch points with the buyer, right? There's 2 emails or, 2 back and forth, and then we're getting the first purchase order. Okay, Jay's question here. If a buyer works from a review calendar, how far in advance is appropriate to reach out? Yeah, Jay, I would say reach out whenever you're ready, and they're going to tell you what that review schedule is. So if you know what the date is, let's say we are reviewing the broth category in August. You can reach out now, right? Reach out basically anytime. And here's why. I could do a whole other webinar on this, but category reviews are BS. And yes, Many retailers do category reviews. So if anybody's listening here and you're like, what's a category review? It's simply where you look at that buyer sits down with their team, they look at the category, right? Like the broth category, and they look at it month over month, year over year, quarter over quarter, and they look at item movement sales, net margin. Sometimes they're looking at spoilage or shrinkage in that category, depending, but they're basically looking at the financial health of that category. And they're saying, what are our slowest moving brands? What's down here at the bottom? What are we going to discontinue? And what changes do we need to make to boost this category's financial results? So that might be bringing in new product lines. It might be re-merchandising a section. It might be applying a different promo strategy and putting some things on strategic sales and things like that. So category reviews are BS because if a buyer is thoroughly convinced that your product is going to help them meet their category goals, they will bring you in. Not all the time, but many times they will bring you in outside of category review schedule. And I know this sounds wild, but we've seen it even with like bigger accounts. We have so many retail ready students who get into Whole Foods outside of category review schedule. And it's because they have convinced that buyer, hey, we're gonna perform so well in this category. Why would you wait until next March to do that category review? Why would you wait until, until you're actually sitting down and looking at this category? So Jay, this is why I say, as soon as you are ready to pitch, reach out. And if your pitch is convincing enough, there are some retailers who will bring you in outside of category review period. So full permission to pitch when you are ready. And again, if you do have that specific date, like, oh, it's August, we always do broth review in August, and you're watching this and it's September 1st, right? And you've missed category review, still reach out. Like the worst thing that can happen is that buyer says, thanks, but no thanks. We've already reviewed your category, reach back out next July. And you're in the same exact position that you're in right now, which is that you still don't have that account, but you've made contact, right? Okay, so Jay, let me know if that answers your question there. Okay, so let's recap. As we wrap up here, let's recap the 4 steps. Talk about what happens briefly about once you're on the shelf, answer any lingering questions, and make sure you know how to join us in Wholesale Week if you're interested. So step number 1 was prepare, craft your why. Why will your product drive sales or financial health of that category for the buyer? How can you prove it to them? And how can you communicate that to them, right? Until you have this nailed down, press pause, don't proceed here. Step number 2 was prepping your P's, thinking about all the details around ordering, delivery, and logistics, and be ready to communicate that to the buyer, right? Well before you get into that first sales conversation. Step number 3 was pitch, the one chance pitch. You've got that one chance to come across as prepared and trustworthy. So don't blow it here. And then number 4 was persistence, the squeaky wheel. Follow up, full permission to follow up until you get that, no, we don't want your product line. Stop following up. Stop emailing me. So what happens next? After you follow up, the hope is that you're on the shelf. And then it's time to celebrate the fact that that wholesale buyer believes in you and trusts that you're going to help them meet the category goals. But there's always a but, right? The work continues here. And we talked about this a bit. So many founders put in most of their resources to get on the shelf and then have limited resources to get off the shelf once you're there. And yes, getting on the shelf is obviously a crucial milestone in retail success. You also need that plan in place to sell through once you're on the shelf. And again, it all goes back to systems here. Systems are my superpower. I love helping brands build their systems. I'm not going to turn this into a sales pitch at all, but I do want you to know that you are welcome to join us in our free Wholesale Week, where we'll dive deeper on these topics starting next Monday on June 3rd. I've got the URL to join us right here on the screen. I can actually put it in the chat too. But this systems development work is exactly what we do with founders inside of Retail Ready. So if you are a values aligned brand who wants a doable system for attracting the right audience, for selling in the right sales channels, for pitching to buyers, to growing strategically with brokers and distributors, if and when they're right for you, join us in Wholesale Week and we'll talk about these things. We're going to give you a sneak peek of all of it. So I'll put it in the chat here if anybody wants to continue the convo with us over there. So as we wrap up here, I want you to hear me when I say this. Your success, your ability to get your product on the retail shelf has everything to do with being prepared for that first sales pitch with the buyer, and very little to do with all of those wonderful product attributes that we talked about in the beginning. So I want you to use this time between now and your next sales pitch, maybe now and fancy food, to get these steps dialed in, get your 5 Ps sorted out, and design your strategy for selling through once you're there. Now, I want to wrap up this training with the same question that we ask on every single Retail Ready call. So it's one thing to join these calls or join a training like this, or to devote your time and your attention to me today. Thank you for that. And it's a whole other thing to put a different action into place and to do something differently in the business as a result of devoting your time and your attention today. So tell me in the chat here as we wrap up, what is one thing that you're going to do or implement or change, test, try, experiment with as a result of being here today? Let me know in the chat. What is one thing that you are going to commit to as a result of being here with us today? Laura says she's going to follow up more and not feel bad about it. Yeah, sales is service, Laura. Like I really want you to know that when you are following up with a sales pitch, it is of service to that buyer. I used to love it. Like, let's say I went to fancy food, right? Came back with a hit list of mile long of brands that I was interested in. And sure enough, 4 months later, if a brand popped into my inbox and they're like, hey, we met at Fancy Food, following up for the 6th time, I'm like, oh, now I'm ready. Thank goodness they emailed me again. I really appreciate that they showed up in my inbox. Sales is service. Yeah, great. William's going to simplify the pitch. Awesome. Yeah, full permission. That buyer's going to love you. Just tone it down. And William, I also trust that you can read social cues and be like, okay, this buyer wants more info, so let me turn it into that conversation and give more details, but we want to keep it as simple as possible for the first one. Jay says, I'm going to create an Amex Works pricing sheet. We've normally produced custom. Oh yeah, great, Jay. Yeah, have just that like one pricing sheet. Oftentimes we see you've got if you do direct versus distributor, you might have 2 different pricing sheets, or you have both on there. But yeah, create that generic pricing sheet. And then, you can just guard it a little bit. You don't have to hand it out to everybody. Michael on first contact ask if they have time to speak right now. Oh yeah, so polite. Just treat them like people, Michael. And Lisa, I'm going to rework my pitch with an emphasis on how our brand will improve the financial health of their category. Great. And Michael's going to do a better job of selling the call screener. So they will pass me on to the actual buyer versus sending some dead end email. Yeah, great. Great, Michael. Awesome. Lots of action items. You guys are good. Gretchen, look, we made it exactly on time here, right at the top of the hour.
Fantastic.
Look at that.
So many good ideas and so much great engagement out there. I really appreciate your time today, Alli, and everybody who attended.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm not doing summer fancy food, but I hope to see you guys at winter fancy food.
There's always another show coming up.
There's always another show.
See you in January. Yeah, fantastic. And for everyone out there, reach out anytime with questions. You can always reach us at education@specialtyfood.com. And Alli has been so generous to share her contact information on screen there as well. Fantastic, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and really appreciate your time today.
Bye.